detentions and tear gas. Dozens of undocumented migrants are arrested trying to storm the U.S. border with Mexico. We have reaction from the White House. The final weeks, what Republicans are planning to do before losing the majority in the House of Representatives early next year. Clergy sex abuse. Pope Francis names an American church leader to help organize next year's Vatican summit addressing the scandal. And Christmas trees at the Vatican and in the nation's capital. Preparations are underway for the Yuletide season. On EWTN News Nightly for Monday, November 26, 2018. Good evening from Washington, D.C., and thank you to those of you joining us from around the world for news from a Catholic perspective. I'm Lauren Ashburn. President Trump tells our White House team that Mexico is trying to keep migrants from crossing into America so he doesn't have to close the border. He threatened to shut it down after hundreds of people tried to rush across the line near San Diego. U.S. agents responded with tear gas, and now the president is renewing his demand for border wall funding. White House correspondent Mark Irons reports. Good evening, Mark.
Good evening, Lauren. I asked President Trump if he has reached a deal with Mexico to hold migrants in place. The incoming Mexican government had previously denied an agreement to detain U.S. asylum seekers was made. But one thing is certain, President Trump says this group of migrants won't be allowed inside the U.S.
Have you reached a deal with Mexico to hold migrants at the border?
Well, Mexico wants to see if they can get it straightened out. But we've, during certain times, as you know, closed the border. They're not coming into the United States. They will not be coming into our country.
But hundreds of migrants tried on Sunday. Migrants pushed past Mexican authorities in Tijuana, just south of San Diego, before U.S. Customs and Border agents respond.
The group immediately started throwing rocks and debris at our agents, taunting the agents. Once our agents were assaulted, and the numbers started growing. We had, 2 or 3 agents at a time initially facing hundreds of people at a time.
The U.S. fired tear gas across the border into Mexico and arrested nearly 70 people who crossed into the U.S. The border crossing at San Isidro, one of the busiest in the country, was locked down for most of the day. Today, President Trump is demanding more action from neighboring government officials. He tweets, Mexico should move the flag-waving migrants, many of whom are stone-cold criminals, back to their countries. Do it by plane, do it by bus, do it any way you want, but they are not coming into the USA. We will close the border permanently if need be. Congress, fund the wall. Mexico says it has sent more than 10,000 Central Americans back to their countries of origin since late October. Almost 2,000 of them members of recent caravans. But a sports complex in Tijuana is serving as a temporary campground for thousands more who have traveled through Mexico in hopes of reaching the U.S. This woman from Honduras says she can't tolerate the violence in her country anymore. The Catholic Church teaches that people have the right to migrate to protect their lives and families, while a country has the right to regulate its borders. Bill Canny, the Executive Director of Migration and Refugee Services at the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops, says he's sad that force had to be used at yesterday's clash along the border. He says he's most interested in the well-being of those fleeing violence, persecution, and severe economic deprivation. He expects that U.S. laws will be respected. Lauren?
Mark, President Trump also made news today when he spoke out about climate change. Tell us why his comments are so controversial.
That's right. The president did not deny climate change itself, but he did challenge the conclusion of a comprehensive report. He denies that climate change will have a huge economic impact. Now, Senator Bernie Sanders immediately shot back, calling Trump's skepticism an international embarrassment and incredibly dangerous. Sanders says we need bold action, not denials. Lauren?
White House correspondent Mark Irons. Thank you, Mark. Joining me now is Alfonso Aguilar, president of the Latino Partnership for Conservative Principles. Alfonso, welcome back to the broadcast.
Happy to be with you.
Happy Thanksgiving, belatedly, and happy to have you here. Homeland Security Secretary Kirstjen Nielsen she seemed to defend yesterday's use of tear gas. Did the events of this weekend bolster the administration's claim that the 5,800 additional National Guard troops that were sent to the border before the election and are now coming home needed to go to the border?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, President Trump is doing the right thing in terms of strengthening border security. Look, we are open to immigration, but we want to make sure that people enter the United States in an orderly fashion.
Right. But we've seen tear gas now. We've seen family separation, neither of which the Trump administration campaigned on. And so far, the wall can't get through a Republican-dominated Congress. So what is Plan B?
Right, but I think we have to look at this as a short-term. We have to look at what short-term measures we can put in place to deal with this immediate situation. And it's sad that it came to using tear gas, but at the same time, that's a standard operating procedure for the police when you're dealing with mobs. So the problem here is not so much Trump, and I think we're paying way too much attention to President Trump. I think Democrats are politicizing this issue. I mean, there may be reasons to criticize Trump's immigration policy, but this specific issue of the caravan, we have to look at the organizers. They're using these people that are having a hard time in their countries economically, and they're telling them to be part of this caravan. They're using them to make a political point, knowing the majority of them don't qualify for asylum. They're going to be detained and they're going to be removed to their country. So that's very sad and it's very unfair.
When I was in Laredo, Texas, I rode around with border guards as they arrested undocumented immigrants along the Rio Grande River. The agents put their lives in harm's way every single day. It's a lose-lose proposition. Agents told me the wall is the answer. As you say, politically, it can't get through Congress. They also told me, though, that when President Trump first took office, the drug cartels were scared.
Right.
And we watched in May of 2016 the number of illegal border crossings go down to 20,000. A year later, they were back up to 52,000. So is that stick approach working when it comes to immigration?
Well, I think so. I mean, you can't see it from one year to the other. You have to look at the last, say, 20 years. And since 2000, we have actually stepped up border security. In 2000, we had about 1,000 detentions along the southern border. Now
a day?
A year.
1,000.
1,000. Oh, sorry. We had about a million.
Okay.
A million.
Okay,
sorry.
good.
A million. Now we have a year of over 440,000. It's a considerable reduction. It's going down, but it's still a very large number. And that's why we need to expand the wall system and use other assets, including drones, sensors, and so forth.
Which they do use. I saw that they were extremely effective in the border crossing, the Border Patrol trying to capture people coming in illegally. This brings us to your point that you tweeted that this incident that happened over the weekend is history repeating itself.
Exactly.
Tell us about
that.
Well,
during the 80s, we had hundreds of people, regularly, families, rushing into the border. That led President Clinton to build the first section of our wall system along the border with Tijuana. And it worked. It was an initial 22 miles. So it was under a Democratic president when we started building a wall system. And that's why, I mean, then we expanded it under the Bush administration across the Yuma sector in Arizona. So walls actually work. I'm not saying that that's the only measure we should take. It should be a comprehensive approach in the border, but we've seen that dramatic reduction from 2000, when we had 1 million, to 440 because we've increased our assets along the border, including strategic fencing. So we should expand it to ensure that we end up with operational control of the border.
I think your critics would say that it must be done compassionately and it must be done in a way that doesn't hurt the dignity of the person. And we have to go. I would love to hear your response to that, maybe off air. Alfonso Aguilar, President of the Latino Partnership for Conservative Principles. Thank you very much. Congress returns from its Thanksgiving break on the agenda for this lame duck session, confirming the president's judicial nominees and funding the government. But pro-life Americans hoping to defund Planned Parenthood will be disappointed. Capitol Hill correspondent Jason Calvi has a preview. Good evening, Jason.
Good evening, Lauren. Congress must pass a spending bill to keep parts of the government open after December 7th. Lawmakers already funded the Department of Defense and Health through September 2019. That means Planned Parenthood is still entitled to federal funding until then.
Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell says the Senate has two goals before the end of the 115th session of Congress: to pass the Farm Bill and to fund the government. And in that spending bill, faithful Catholics had hoped pro-life lawmakers would finally make good on their promise to defund Planned Parenthood. But the minority leader has a warning.
If the government shuts down, it's on their back. Now, we want a couple of things. We want to make sure that the acting attorney general does not interfere with the Mueller investigation.
Criminal justice reform is not yet on the agenda, but many groups, including the U.S. bishops and the American Conservative Union, want to see action.
It's important because we believe in human dignity, right? We believe that every life has value, from birth to natural death.
David Safarian supports a bill called the First Step Act. It would give more flexibility for sentences of some nonviolent criminals.
And if they're going to be released, we want them to come out better than when they went into prison in the first place. That is the whole point behind the First Step Act. The First Step Act creates incentives so that inmates take the time and do the hard work to improve themselves.
But Senator Tom Cotton, Republican from Arkansas, says it would let criminals off the hook. Yesterday, Cotton tweeted, "Last year, 72,000 Americans died from drug overdoses. Why does the bill reduce the penalty for repeat fentanyl and heroin traffickers?"
The president says he will sign this bill if it arrives on his desk. But Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell is not promising a vote. Lauren, right now there are 181,000 federal inmates.
What main issues, Jason, are at stake in this spending bill?
The number one controversy is funding for the border wall, which we just heard in that interview with Alfonso. Congressional leaders, it's really unclear if they're going to be able to reach a compromise with the White House on that issue. And I just got an email from pro-life group Live Action, and they say they are working with several pro-life groups to ask the president to work with Congress to defund Planned Parenthood in this lame duck session of Congress.
Capitol Hill correspondent Jason Calvi. Thank you, Jason. 5 international charities are urging the United States to stop all of its military activity in Yemen. They say the U.S. support for a Saudi-led coalition will soon lead to widespread famine and the deaths of millions. Correspondent Wyatt Goolsby reports from the State Department. Good evening, Wyatt.
Good evening, Lauren. Top officials here at the State Department have given no indication they'll change course when it comes to Yemen. But aid groups say the U.S. military is at least partially responsible for the world's worst humanitarian crisis, one they say is only getting worse.
8-month-old Yasmin is just one of many infants in this Yemeni hospital. She, like the others, don't cry. The babies are severely malnourished, their bodies lethargic and feeble, and lack the energy to cry. The World Health Organization says the nearly 4-year-long war has led to food insecurity in the country.
Many people do not have access to enough food and to the right types of food. At the same time, there are outbreaks of diseases, infections such as cholera, measles, malaria, pneumonia.
The United Nations report more than 1.3 million children have suffered from severe acute malnutrition since a Saudi-led coalition went to war with Yemen's Houthi rebels, backed by Iran, in March of 2015. Now, 5 international charities say the U.S. must stop its military support for Saudi Arabia. In a joint statement by the International Rescue Committee, Oxfam America, CARE U.S., Save the Children, and the Norwegian Refugee Council, 14 million people are at risk of starving to death if both parties don't change course immediately. One of the most violent areas is the port city of Hodeidah. Airstrikes and street battles have left most of the city destroyed. David Beasley with the World Food Program says the port is the country's lifeline, where most of the fuel and food is brought in.
I'm here at this port today to send a very clear message to the world that we need to protect this port at all costs, make certain that it can function at the highest capacity, because if we don't, people are going to die.
But the fighting is still raging in Hodeidah and other areas, and previous peace efforts have failed to produce any agreement to stop the violence.
Secretary of Defense James Mattis says peace talks will take place next month in Sweden and that all parties, the rebels, Yemen's government, Saudi Arabia, are all on board. Now, Bishop Paul Hinder, who's the apostolic vicar in southern Arabia, which includes Yemen, told the Italian daily newspaper La Stampa it's difficult to have a clear sense of what's going on there because he cannot enter the country himself. He adds faithful Christians, which have always been small in Yemen anyway, have already been reduced even more. Lauren?
Correspondent Wyatt Goolsby reporting from the State Department. Thank you, Wyatt. At least 24 people are dead after two violent attacks in Somalia. In one, two suicide bombers killed a prominent Islamic leader and 17 of his followers for having music in their religious ceremonies. Al-Shabaab, a group of extremist rebels, claims responsibility. In another, a car bomb exploded at a busy intersection. Tens of thousands of Romanians gathered in Bucharest for the consecration of an Orthodox cathedral. The church has towers nearly 40 stories high. It was dedicated to mark 100 years since modern-day Romania was created in the aftermath of World War I. Pope Francis has named a close U.S. ally to an organizing committee for a Vatican summit on clergy sex abuse in February. Cardinal Blaise Cupich, Archbishop of Chicago, will be helping the Vatican plan the meeting. His inclusion is significant since he is not the head of the Bishops' Conference, like other appointees on the committee, and otherwise would have no reason to attend the gathering. The Pope's spokesman says the focus will be on transparency and accountability.
The February meeting is unprecedented, and one in which the Pope wants to show that the protection of children is a fundamental priority for the Church. Pope Francis himself will be very much involved in these preparations.
The Pope called for the four-day summit in September following sex abuse scandals in the United States, Australia, and Chile. Vatican correspondent Juliet Lindley joins us from Rome. Juliet, in addition to Cardinal Cupich, who else is going to be there?
Lauren, the Holy Father has designated Archbishop Charles Scicluna. He's the Vatican's top sex abuse investigator, as well as Cardinal Oswald Gracious of Mumbai, India, and Father Hans Zollner, who's a member of the organizing committee. And now Zollner is the Vatican's point person for its Sex Abuse Advisory Commission, as we know, Lauren.
And they are friends of our program. Will lay people be involved?
They will indeed. Women working in the Vatican as well as abuse survivors will contribute. Greg Burke told us today that some bishops have actually never talked to a victim of sex abuse. And Burke says that urgently needs to change. Church leaders say the aim of this meeting is to ensure that the Church understands the devastating impact of clergy sex abuse and develop a clear path forward. Pope Francis has said that no effort must be spared to create a culture able to prevent abuse and cover up.
And that's Greg Burke, the Vatican press secretary. What do we know about concrete measures that are being taken in the run-up to this February meeting?
Now, Lauren, Father Hans Zollner is saying that a questionnaire will be sent ahead of time to participants to allow them to share experiences as well as difficulties and possible solutions. Zollner says that the Church needs to take every measure to prevent abuse and cover-ups. The committee will prepare basic documents for the participants and will be working closely with the Commission for the Protection of Minors, which is headed, as we know, by Cardinal Sean O'Malley of Boston.
Well, speaking of Cardinal O'Malley, some people were surprised he wasn't included in this organizing committee, and neither was Cardinal Daniel DiNardo, who is head of the U.S. Bishops' Conference. Why do you think they are being excluded from the planning of this meeting?
Lauren, Cardinal O'Malley says that the organizing committee will work closely with his commission, so he's already involved in the planning of the February meeting. And in a statement, O'Malley says he'll be pushing for the release of names of credibly accused priests. As for DiNardo, the Associated Press is reporting that it could be due to tensions between him and the Vatican. Earlier this month, the Holy See told the U.S. bishops not to vote on measures to prevent abuse, and it's caused frustration among bishops. And the Vatican still has not to this day explained why exactly it blocked the vote.
Juliet Lindley, EWTN News Nightly Vatican correspondent, thank you so much.
Thank you, Lauren.
Coming up, abortion rates in the United States are declining. We'll have analysis. A new government study says the abortion rate in America is declining. The Centers for Disease Control says between 2014 and 2015, those are the most recent numbers available, the number of abortions fell by 2%, from 652,639 to 638,169. And the ratio fell from 192 abortions per 1,000 live births to 188. Joining me now for analysis is Michael New, visiting assistant professor at the Bush School of Business at the Catholic University of America. And you're also an associate scholar at the research group Charlotte Lozier Institute. Welcome to the program.
Thanks for having me.
To our broadcast. The U.S. abortion rate has been on the decline since 1980, and this data suggests the trend is continuing. What do you believe is behind the decrease?
I think several things are behind the decrease. I think the most important factor that we see from the data is that a higher percentage of unintended pregnancies are being carried to term. We've seen the abortion rate fall by 50% since 1980. It's actually lower than it was in 1973. The year Roe v. Wade was handed down. And we have good data suggesting that, again, a higher percentage of unintended pregnancies are being carried to term. And I think that shows pro-life educational, political, and service efforts are all effective.
But wouldn't you say that that rate's fodder for pro-activist, pro-abortion activists who say abortions are going down, so why legislate change?
Well, I think we have good research showing that a lot of the legislative things we do are effective. We have good research showing that public funding limits are getting abortion numbers down. Parental involvement laws get abortion numbers down. I did a study a couple years ago for the Lozier Institute, which finds that the federal Hyde Amendment, which places limits on the ability of the federal government to fund abortion, has probably stopped over 2 million abortions since 1976. So it's a variety of things. It's changing hearts and minds, legislation, a variety of efforts are playing a role in this.
As our Capitol Hill correspondent Jason Calvi often reports, that is something that comes up every year for renewal and is something that we watch very closely on this show. How complete, though, is this data, given the fact that California, Maryland, and New Hampshire all failed to report for 2015?
It's unfortunate that federal abortion reporting requirements are pretty weak, that the CDC really cannot require states to report their data. Unfortunately, California has not reported any data since 1997.
97? Why is that?
It's a very good question. I'd like to see the Trump administration really take some lead in taking and strengthening these reporting requirements. I'm not sure why California's been so delinquent, but we do know from data from both the CDC and Guttmacher tend to mirror each other.
Guttmacher is?
Was up until recently Planned Parenthood's research arm. They do a survey of abortion clinics, and their data does tend to track the CDC data. So we know from multiple sources that abortion numbers are in fact going down.
Just this month, the Ohio House of Representatives passed one of the most restrictive abortion bills in the country, one that would penalize doctors for performing an abortion when a fetal heartbeat could be detected. You've talked about how significant pro-life legislation has been, and this law, by the way, is now heading to the Ohio Senate. Do you think with this administration we are now going to see more laws like this passed?
I think that the confirmation of Judge Kavanaugh has given pro-lifers some hope that additional kinds of protective laws will be upheld. So I think we'll see additional 20-week bans. I think we will see some states trying to mirror what Ohio is doing. And I think the pro-lifers are optimistic of being able to do more to protect the unborn.
You mean the pro-lifers downtown in Pittsburgh?
Yes, absolutely.
Where you're from?
Yeah, the Yinzers.
There, you're the Yinzers. Okay, thank you so much. Michael New, visiting assistant professor in the Bush School of Business at the Catholic University of America. Bishop Robert Morlino of Madison, Wisconsin, died Saturday after suffering a heart attack. The 71-year-old was known for his strong opposition to abortion and same-sex marriage. During Morlino's 15-year leadership at the diocese, more men studied to become priests, and Latin masses made a comeback in some areas. Funeral arrangements have not been released. Up next, how the White House and the Vatican are preparing for Christmas, just 29 days away. The fourth annual #IGiveCatholic kicks off tomorrow on Giving Tuesday. You can donate to parishes, schools, and nonprofits. 29 archdioceses and dioceses across the country will participate. Head to igivecatholic.org to donate. First Lady Melania Trump unveils the decked halls of 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue in a video on Twitter. Wow, that looks so pretty. It's the second Christmas at the White House for the Trumps. This year's theme is American Treasures. And the White House says the elaborate display was designed by the First Lady herself. Dozens of Christmas trees are there, including the 18-foot official White House one. And for the 51st year, this gorgeous White House creche will be on display in the East Room. It's something to see. Just down the street, the official Christmas tree for the U.S. Capitol has arrived. The 80-foot tall noble fir made the 3,000-mile journey from Oregon. This year's tree lighting ceremony is set for Wednesday, December 5th. And the Vatican's Christmas tree, can you tell we're all excited about Christmas, only 29 more days to go, is up in St. Peter's Square. Towering about 75 feet high, this year's tree is a spruce from northern Italy. It stands next to the Vatican's nativity scene, which, get this, is being sculpted out of sand. The official lighting ceremony is going to be on December 7th. 'Tis the season, 29 days. For all of us here at EWTN News Nightly, to all of you around the world, thank you for watching. I'm Lauren Ashburn. Let's keep in touch online. Follow me at Lauren Ashburn on Twitter and Lauren Ashburn EWTN on Facebook. Good night, and God bless you.